We finally know what happened to Infinite's campaign, DLC story, and more from Hidden Xperia. I haven't seen this guy in a while.
Ever since launch, it's been rather clear that there were things missing from Halo Infinite's campaign. It was very obvious that a lot was cut, but we didn't quite know how much was cut until now. So the information that we're going to be covering today comes courtesy of various different reputable sources: Jason Schreier, Jez Corden, Rebs Gaming, and also multiple public posts by verified X343 developers who worked on Halo Infinite. Now, I do want to give a particularly special shout out to Rebs Gaming for letting me collate a load of the information that he's gathered from all of his own sources and put into his own videos, so make sure you check out his channel, the link is in the description. So today, we're not only going to be covering what was cut from Halo Infinite's campaign, but also the litany of reasons why it was cut. However, first, I need to make something abundantly clear. So the root cause of a lot of the issues that we're going to be talking about later on in this video is shock horror, the leadership. However, it's the old leadership. The leadership that is no longer at 343 and no longer involved with Halo in any capacity. The current revamped leadership that are now directing Halo had nothing to do with any of the
I'm just going to take a shot in the dark, and I'm going to say the current leadership at 343 is probably Activision.
infuriating problems that we're going to come to discuss later on. Please, please, please do not go full sins of the father and start blaming.
Well, when I say Activision, I don't mean literally Activision. I mean, it could literally be Activision. But I mean, it is probably the exact same. It's like a copy of Activision. I bet they're copying the model of Activision for 343.
The current leadership for the actions of their predecessors that they had no hand in at all. And also, please don't just automatically assume that the current leadership will just repeat all of their mistakes. Truth be told, we won't
they'll make
actually
new
know
mistakes.
what they're like at all until they ship their first game. There's a reason that I'm yet to be positive or negative about
That's not true. That's not true. We can see what the developers say in the meantime. And there are some buzzwords, there are some red flags that they could definitely say that'll give us a pretty good idea of what these people are about.
In any way, because honestly, we won't know what they're like until they ship their first game. So please, please just keep all of that in mind and be civil. Oh, and if you're curious about the people who reported all the information that I'm going to talk about in this video, they're all people that have reported various leaks before in the past, and they've got a very verifiably accurate track record. So, disclaimer spiel all out of the way, let's start talking about the good stuff. Cut content. So, broadly speaking, Halo Infinite started out as something of a Breath of the Wild inspired open world experience. However, by summer of 2019, which was only just over a year out from the game's original release, development was in what an ex-developer called crisis mode, and so 2/3 of the campaign were cut. More specifically though, one huge loose end that the game never once addresses is what happened to the UNSC Infinity, and although we still somehow don't know what happened to it canonically, we now know 343's original plans for it in Halo Infinite. So, shock horror, the UNSC Infinity wasn't actually meant to disappear into the ether. It was instead meant to crash land on Zeta Halo and serve as a hub location for you to return to. An FOB of sorts. As your central hub, you'd return to it for various reasons between missions, one of which was to interact with the Infinity's Marines and scientists who would give you quests to complete in the open world. And you know, I can't help but think that this would have reused some of the same design and code from those Halo 5 weapons down missions, except, well, you know, with actual intent and purpose behind your interactions. This Infinity Hub also reused assets from a cancelled Halo 5 project called Halo Infinity, which was a very early iteration of Halo 5's multiplayer that was radically different to what we got. Halo 5 Infinity was a version of the game
I never played Halo 5. I don't think I was missing much.
game's multiplayer that had a Destiny-style social hub set within the UNSC Infinity, where you could explore the various levels of the ship, very akin to Destiny's Tower. This was eventually scrapped, however, due to resource and time constraints, but we did see some remnants of it, both in Halo 5's beta menu, and also at E3 2015's Warzone preview experience.
Did he just say resource and time constraints? what happened to Halo being the mascot game for Xbox? Wouldn't you want to pour all of your resources that you could possibly pour into your biggest game of all time? Literally the game that made the company. Microsoft would have died if not for Halo. Legit. 100% no lie.
But that's a pretty big tangent. Eventually, Halo Infinite's Infinity Hub was cut and then redesigned into a single UNSC compound, which we actually saw in various bits of concept art. But then, sadly, that was cut as well, and in its place, we got the rather bare bones and frankly boring FOBs that we see in the main game. I'm not gonna lie, this really does suck because the Infinity Hub and even the central kind of UNSC compound buildings sound like they had life and character to them, whereas I gotta say, the FOBs really didn't, to be honest. Anyway, moving on, let's talk now about what was hands down the #1 most anticipated part of Halo Infinite's post-launch life, and that was also one of my personal greatest sources of excitement for Halo literally ever: campaign DLC. Now, to temper expectations real quick, nothing has been leaked, at least yet, about 343's story plans with the DLC. However, Kevin Schmidt, who was an ex-343 senior lead designer on Infinite's campaign, said that 343 built systems within Halo Infinite for PvE Spartan Ops-like content to integrate into the campaign post-launch as a part of the game's overall live service. He said that tons of work was done to create and implement live service features and systems suitable for campaign in anticipation of DLC. Now, on the topic of campaign DLC, obviously it's not happening now, but whilst we're talking about it, there are some people that still like to deny the fact that it was ever even planned. Of course, 343 never officially confirmed it or said that it was ever coming, but there's quite a bit of near enough indisputable evidence, I would say, besides Kevin's words there, that confirm it.
There's always a plan to make more money. If they can viably have a DLC, then they would have had a DLC. But if they couldn't do it, then if it was going to cost them money and not make them any money, they're not going to do it.
Was planned at one point. So first off, there was the Halo the Endless trademark that Microsoft filed right after launch. Then, if you go on the Wayback Machine...
Honestly, I'm glad they didn't go with that, because Halo the Endless sounds lame. It sounds super lame. It sounds like a knockoff Halo game, like a fan-made game.
And go to Halo Waypoint very shortly after Infinite's launch. On the Infinite section of the page, there's a section that literally says campaigns plural. And then also, if you go into Infinite's game files, the launch campaign is referred to as Campaign S1, so Campaign Season 1. So it's pretty clear here that there were plans to have more campaigns down the line. One quick note though, ignore the DLC moniker at the side of the text here. The only reason that's there is because Infinite is free to play and obviously the campaign is pay to play. So the campaign has to be kind of classified as DLC because of that. That doesn't actually mean anything, just don't look at that. Now, going back to what Kevin said, integrating a Spartan Ops style mode or kind of extra campaign into the regular campaign as a part of the live service was literally something that I asked for and honestly at one point practically begged for before the game even released. It really felt like a no-brainer. Just imagine, right? You finish the campaign as Master Chief, and then the post-campaign content, of course, in between the major story DLCs that we were supposed to be getting that continued the main story, was you playing as your own Spartan 4, who canonically was one of the survivors of the Infinity Crash, going around the open world and carrying out smaller objectives. Again, like Kevin said, very Spartan Ops-esque. You know, I've said this a lot over the years, but
The hunters in Halo Infinite are probably the least terrifying hunters in the entire Halo series, because they're just so easy to take out. Even on Legendary.
Halo 4 was a case of a great idea just being executed terribly. The levels were so boring and repetitive, but the idea of going on missions on Requiem as your canonical Spartan 4 after the campaign was amazing, and it would have arguably worked even better in Zeta Halo's open world. I gotta say, it's really cool to know that this was at least one of 343's plans with post-launch campaign content at some point. It's just really sad that it never came to be. So, if all this talk about Halo's campaign is making you want to hop on and play some, then, well, may I recommend my Flood-themed PCs made in partnership with Apex Gaming PC, and for Okay, speaking of the Zeta Halo open world, one of the main components of this open world in the base campaign were the Banished Outposts. Now, as fun as these encounters were for the first or second time, they were a far cry away from what 343 originally intended for them to be. This info again comes from Kevin Schmidt, who very recently shared a picture of an original version of Infinite's Banished Outposts, specifically of their layout, their gameplay loop, and the systems that surrounded them. Instead of one singular base that you assaulted, these areas were instead comprised of various specialized sub-bases, and then at the center, a heavily fortified...
That sounds really cool, and they should have implemented that. But I bet they were having all kinds of trouble inside the company, and that's why they didn't actually get to do anything. I bet it wasn't even because of money. I bet it was because of infighting.
Stronghold. And according to some of Reb's sources who worked in the campaign, this reveal also gives us a deeper insight into a major part of the campaign that was cut: factions. So, instead of the single isolated structures of the outpost that we ended up getting, the strongholds were a much more realistic network of various mini-structures that surrounded the central core stronghold building. These sub-bases were barracks, weapon depots, and vehicle bases. The idea was that assaulting the stronghold would be incredibly difficult if you didn't first take out the surrounding outposts and facilities. If you for some reason chose not to...
A huge problem that I had when I was playing Halo Infinite, since it's all taking place in the same area, everything looks exactly the same. The only thing you get different is like the structures look slightly different. It's very boring.
Then loud sirens would blare that would summon tons of extremely strong troops to support the stronghold as you tried to assault it, making it near impossible to take over. Coming back to the factions, the entire world map was supposed to be split into several regions, with each region being controlled by a different sub-faction of the Banished, with the warlords in command of these factions using the strongholds in the areas as their main base of operations. Now, I'd assume that the intent with this was for each island to be controlled by a certain faction, because when you look at the map, it's almost very neatly segmented up, but that's just me trying to infer something. The warlords that led these factions would be named bosses that acted as the apex enemy of each stronghold, and each one of them had their own logo that was painted on their vehicles and various other places, very akin to how the white hand of Saruman was brandished on Lurtz's face, and also the equipment of all the other Uruk-hai in Lord of the Rings, which, given the heavy Uruk-hai inspiration for the Banished in Halo Wars 2, is extremely fitting and something that I'm very sad we never got as a lifelong ultra...
Halo Infinite just makes me sad. Microsoft, they make me sad.
Mega Lord of the Rings fan. These warlords could also buff troops around them, which only further added to the difficulty of assaulting the strongholds alone. But they weren't the only unique enemies. Stationed at the nearby barracks outpost would be the warlord's personal guards, their Praetorian guards as Kevin Schmidt called them, who had increased stats and were also a lot harder to kill than a regular enemy. Then, the weapon depots were populated by normal enemies that wielded unique legendary weapons, akin to Halo 5's legendary variants, and the vehicle base was home to legendary vehicle variants.
Sitting here listening to what could have been makes me never want to play another 343 Halo again. I don't have any reason to, anyway. I keep coming back to Halo 2, 3, and Reach. First one sometimes even too. ODST, great game.
Again, very much like Halo 5's, of which only one eventually made it into Halo Infinite, the Catalyst Chopper. Now, the idea was that if you didn't take out all of these individual...
And the chopper sucks in Halo Infinite. I hate it. It doesn't feel the same.
Support
feels really floaty.
Attacking the central stronghold, all of these unique enemies, weapons, and vehicles would be sent to kill you, making it near impossible to take the stronghold without first clearing them. Just imagine for a second trying to clear a stronghold whilst there's 15 brutes firing.
Yeah, just imagine how difficult it would be, except you can give all of your troops an upgraded rocket launcher or sniper rifles, and they're just gonna headshot their way through there. That's how I beat Halo Infinite. It took me like 10 hours to beat that game because I just immediately figured out that you can just take your your Marines around with you, and they'll kill everything, and you don't have to do anything.
Arcane Sentinel beams at you. Yeah, I can start to see now why this was meant to be impossible. Something else that these support bases had were modular upgrades that you could then take back to the hub and apply to various elements of the sandbox to upgrade them. I'm talking weapon attachments and also, by the sounds of it, vehicle attachments as well, given what the support bases actually were. Now, something that I started to wonder when I was writing this video is if some of the weapon and vehicle mods that you could scavenge in the campaign, when they got cut, later got repurposed into the various weapon and vehicle model microtransactions in multiplayer, seeing as for quite a while, all of these models that were releasing.
After playing Halo Reach and then playing Halo Infinite with all these microtransactions, it's such garbage because you don't unlock anything. It takes so long. You don't even know how to unlock anything because you can't just unlock anything. See, it says available for purchase. There's no other way. You have to buy it.
Were literally just attachments as opposed to entirely new models. Like, for example, there was one that was a different shroud for the pistol, or a different muzzle brake for the BR, or different tires for the Warthog. They aren't entirely new models, they're almost objectively speaking attachments. Just some food for thought though. Either way, the idea of in-depth weapon customization is something that I would love to see in a Halo spin-off. I'm a huge firearms nerd, and
you know what would happen? You would be paying for each individual part. No, thank you.
I'd love to have like Tarkov level weapon customization for like a BR-55 or an M90 shotgun or a sniper rifle. That's like dream come true material. Don't get me wrong, I don't want Halo to suddenly go back to trying to clone COD in every way and add some kind of gunsmith nonsense to regular multiplayer, but for a spin-off game, absolutely, this kind of stuff would be incredible. Just imagine like Tarkov level weapon customization for Halo weapons in a gritty ODST shooter. Okay, I'm going to stop dreaming because I'm going to start hyping myself up for something that will likely never happen. Anyway, moving on, in the space between the sub-bases, you'd run into brute patrols and prisoner convoys that were going between each facility. And then eventually, when you took over the stronghold and killed all the enemies within, the UNSC would move in and take command of them, which I think, from memory, is what happens with the outpost that we got in Halo Infinite. I'm pretty sure that Marines come in and like overtake them once you've cleared the Banished out, but the way it's integrated in the campaign is nowhere near close to the extent that it was meant to be integrated. Okay, real quick, time out. Your boy's got a theory.
Okay, time out. Stop the bike. Time out. Come on, stop the bike.
Obviously, some watered-down facets of the system did make their way into Halo Infinite, specifically the Outposts, but I also think that despite factions being cut, the Warlords were repurposed into the rather anemic Hand of Atriox that we ended up getting. So the
I didn't even understand
really hyped up, like
I didn't understand why this was a thing. I probably should have played Halo 5 because I didn't know who any of the characters were. I didn't know what the story was, why anything was happening, what this planet was, or this Halo was.
Kind of a weird amount in 2020, I remember, as being quite a big part of the campaign, both in terms of the gameplay and also the narrative.
Yeah, and then you don't end up fighting the guy at the end. It ends up being a different boss that I don't know. It was just garbage.
In reality, it really didn't end up being as significant as it seemed it was going to be. And I think a great example of that is Hyperius and Tavares. So those two bosses in particular really feel like leftovers of this old warlord and faction system, given that they have no...
I think literally everything in Halo Infinite was a leftover. I think they didn't have time to do the ambitious stuff and was like, well, we kind of still have a game here. We put all this money into it. We can't just cancel it. Everybody's hyped about it. Ship it. Ship it.
Intro to their boss fight. They have a very loosely designed arena, no presence or even offhand mention in any prior cutscene, almost zero build up to them even existing, and also the fact that you fight one of them in literally the only vehicle variant in the entire game. And you know, now that I think about it, Tremonius and I guess Chaklock as well kind of feel like leftovers of this system as well, but more well-built and robust leftovers. The areas that you fight them in kind of feel like what I imagine the central strongholds would have felt like. they aren't just these massive open areas like Hyperius and Tavares' arena. Instead, they're like actual POIs of different regions of the map, presumably the regions that the factions they were once warlords of controlled. Theories aside though, themed boss fights like these taking place at each outpost would have given them so much more identity than I think they really ended up having, and to be honest, they kind of feel like the missing piece of their puzzle. It makes so much more sense for these significant and named locations on the map to be controlled by equally significant named bosses as opposed to, I don't know, just like another chieftain or an elite general with an energy sword, you know? Like, it just makes them feel more significant. Anyways, back to the actual cut
It
content.
didn't really.
Dungeons were originally planned to be in the campaign, supposedly based on Mass Effect Andromeda's dungeons. Now, not gonna lie, I'm not a Mass Effect guy. I've played about 5 hours of Mass Effect in total, and I could never get into it as much as I really want to. So I don't know what the dungeons were like in Andromeda, but I mean, a dungeon is a dungeon, right? I've been in dungeons in Elden Ring.
I love Mass Effect. Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3. Some of my favorite games of all time. 3 is probably my least favorite of the trilogy. Andromeda. What the hell even is that? I never played it. I heard it was garbage. It looks like garbage. It's a completely different story. No thank you. But Mass Effect 2, perfect.
In Skyrim and Oblivion, etc., etc. I imagine they're all kind of the same, right? I'd also assume that some of the cave systems we got in the campaign, especially that one with like a real foreigner door in it, was probably a leftover of the dungeon system. And speaking of the caves, there was a gigantic creature called the Crusher that was cut, that had literally an entire cave designed solely for an encounter with one. Now, these things are really interesting actually, because believe it or not, they're in fact the first enemy that we ever saw for Halo Infinite. Remember that thing that walks past the tent in the original E3 2018 trailer and knocks the radio over?
Yeah.
Well, yep, that's a Crusher. Now, I'm not gonna lie, if these bad boys ever come back, I kind of hope they redesign them into a Sharkoi, to be quite honest with you. I think these designs are cool, but they kind of...
I think they need to bring back some of the deadly animals from the Halo series. Like, wasn't there a spot in Halo Reach where these 2 giant animals would just start attacking you if you went into their area? Or did they just run away? I don't remember. I remember there being 2 giant animals and you being able to interact with them. Halo Reach had a lot of animals you could interact with, and, like, kill.
Fill the exact same role that a Sharkoi would fill for the most part, and it's just far past time that we get these iconic bad boys in a game, and this role would be perfect for them. I am literally praying that the next game has Sharkoi in finally. Anyway, to the surprise of literally nobody, different biomes were also meant to happen. Supposedly meant to be integrated into the open world, similar to the biomes in Breath of the Wild, which again, I know I'm committing sacrilege here, but I've never played it. Never played a single Zelda game in my entire life, so how they were integrated into Breath of the Wild...
You're not missing much. I didn't really like Breath of the Wild that much. Tears of the Kingdom I liked even less. I feel like there's almost too much stuff to do, and that all that stuff is based around Nintendo-like mechanics. And like, you gotta kind of know how Nintendo games work. I didn't really like it. I just felt like it was too much.
Well, you're gonna have to fill me in the comments down below. Okay, this last piece of cut content pertains to something that has absolutely fascinated me since literally the game's launch, since I first opened the map in Halo Infinite. It's something that activated the 2009 Type 99 on Doris part of my brain for, well, literally the first time since 2009. This whole island in the northeast part of the map that was modeled but never used for anything. Now, for the longest time, we always assumed that this island was going to be used for DLC, which, I'll be honest, likely was the case at some point, but obviously that never came to fruition. However, using a now patched glitch, people were able to actually get to this island and explore it, and what's on it is really interesting. So there are entirely modeled lakes, a banished outpost, a cave, a sniper rifle, and a Halo 1 health pack. And this is where it gets interesting. So, according to one of Reb's XV43 sources, this island was originally meant to be a gameplay space, but sadly it was cut when between half and 2/3 of the game was scrapped. Now, that health pack specifically is a more recent find, and you can click
do you remember what it was like, the release of Halo Infinite, where they basically were rushing it out for holidays, and that trailer happened, and they were like, "Uh-oh, we better push it back." I bet all this stuff got cut before that trailer, and they were like, "Oh, we screwed up," and then they had to add some more stuff in, and they didn't add the right things in. And it's just bad. It's just real bad.
Clearly see in this picture that it has that blue outline around it that implies that it was part of the sandbox and was able to be picked up and interacted with. And what would you guess? That was the original plan. So that same source also told Rebs that as a part of the push to have Infinite act as a spiritual reboot of the series that took heavy inspiration from Combat Evolved,
it seems like the actual Halo game was cut.
health packs and the health system were going to return. There was a heavy push apparently for Combat Evolved inspiration to specifically influence the gameplay and the exploration, which of course are two things that the health packs would influence, but sadly they were cut by former Sandbox team leaders without ever providing a reason. They even go on to say that the Sandbox team had a lot of decision-making power for Infinite's development and were apparently responsible for a significant amount of cut content. The health pack model itself did later get reused as a gun charm and also a utility, but something tells me we might end up seeing this model again in a certain remake. So, you're probably all thinking, wow, that sounds really, really cool. What happened to it? Why was it cut? And well, there are quite a few reasons, all of which, once again, I've sourced from Jason Schreier, Jez Corden, Rebs Gaming's videos, and also multiple public X343 developer posts. And also, once again, quick reminder, all the issues we're going to talk about were caused by the previous leadership, not the current leadership. Once again, I know I'm a massive Metal Gear Solid fan, but no sins of the father, fellas. Remember that. Also, these are leaks, so do always take them with a grain of salt. So then, according to one of Rebs' X343 sources, the campaign team were placed in a bubble and were restricted from studio collaboration. Now, all you've got to do is go back and watch any of the old Bungie or hell, even 343 Vidocs, and you'll realize how important collaboration between teams is in game development. And for some peculiar reason, upper management just didn't see that. Apparently, they thought that raw manpower, just throwing more devs at a problem, was more effective than collaboration, which I think it's fair to say isn't the case. This extreme compartmentalization is even worse when you consider that the campaign team were creating the...
If you get a whole bunch of people who don't know how to screw in a light bulb to change your lights, you're going to end up with a whole lot of broken light bulbs.
First ever open world Halo campaign. They were designing something that Halo has literally never done before. So the collaboration that they were weirdly denied would have been even more valuable than ever before. Now, by the sounds of what some of Rebs' other sources said, this bubble went beyond just the campaign team. In fact, leadership split the entire studio into a number of different and highly segmented teams. But even worse was the fact that these teams were constantly vying for resources. Jason Schreier's source even said that
they were fighting over resources and they weren't talking to each other, so they didn't know what the other teams were doing in a game that they were all working on together.
It was like the studio was split into fiefdoms, and that this compartmentalization was so extreme that it felt like 4 to 5 different games were being developed simultaneously. This was so damaging, in fact, that it caused Infinite's creative direction to be up in the air until unusually late in the game's development. This development in a bubble with no collaboration apparently drained and stressed the campaign team, and so, as a remedy, the leadership started doing these things called hackathons, which were these week-long events where developers could take a break from working on Infinite to develop prototypes of their dream Halo games. Now, hackathons are pretty popular in tech. In fact, some pretty major things have actually been born from hackathons. I mean, Twitter, for example, was born from a hackathon, so they're quite a big deal.
I didn't know that.
The idea with them isn't to specifically create an actual product, but rather just to prototype ideas and kind of have them on the back burner for later development, and in this case to also try and help raise morale as well. And fun fact, this is actually where the prototype for that saber-based space combat game Halo Starfighter came from. Starfighter was Kevin Schmidt's hackathon project. Reb sources said that these hackathons actually did go a long way in helping to improve team morale. It kind of just let them stretch their creative legs a bit on something that was different, yet still Halo. However, only 2 of them ever actually happened before they were shut down and all the prototypes made from them discarded because ultimately they didn't move Infinite's campaign any closer to completion. And the ironic thing is that the developers that spoke to Rebs told him that this actually had the opposite to the intended effect. The hackathons were having their intended effect.
How long did it take them to create this game? How long was this game in development? Because I think they needed like 3 more years. Everybody kept saying, oh, they need 1 more year. They need 1 more year. No, I think they needed 3 more. I don't think this game should be out still. I think it should still be in development.
Were feeling more creative, more productive, and morale was higher. They were a very nice creative break from the work that was creatively draining them, but when they were stopped, the devs were sent back to square one. Okay, moving on to the testing that the campaign received, or rather the lack thereof, one of Rebs' sources said that the campaign received 0 external focus testing.
I was legit.
Literally every
I was legit about to say that I bet they had 0 testing. Like, that is insane.
By a Halo campaign, with I think the only exception to that being Combat Evolved. I spoke to a Bungie developer quite a long time ago now, and I'm pretty sure they said that Halo 1 didn't have any focus group testing. They only start with Halo 2, but that's by the by. However, when Joe Staten joined, he started to run external focus group testing for the campaign, but apparently by that point it was just too little too late. Rather, instead of doing external testing, the studio did something called Days of Play, which were days that they set aside for the entire studio to play the campaign. However, again, for some weird reason, leadership eventually stopped these days as well, alongside a load of other meetings and reviews for the campaign too, which inadvertently cut off all feedback loops for the campaign team as, like I said before, they were locked in a bubble. Reb said that nobody knew why leadership stopped these days. I assume it was to get everyone back to work on Infinite and make sure.
What are you guys doing playing the game? You can't be playing the game. We have to develop it. We got a game we got to release, guys. What are you doing playing around? It's like everybody in the gaming industry at the top, at least, is just incompetent. Stop. I'm talking to you. Stop buying these games. Like, stop it. Because we're just going to keep getting more and more and more slop. It's going to keep getting worse and worse and worse if we just keep letting it happen. And I'll tell you, I ain't letting it happen. I'm not the one buying these games. I'm poor. So it's definitely not me buying these games. I can't even buy the games that I want. That
it reached completion in time, but apparently the leadership didn't even bother taking part in the Days of Play when they were running, which isn't exactly the best look. The only time the leadership asked for studio-wide campaign feedback after Days of Play were cancelled was months before the game was shipped, which by that point, I mean, there was no time left to act on any of the feedback they were given. Again, it was too little too late. All in all, this is a pretty commonly known thing now, but it's the unanimously agreed upon opinion of a litany of ex-developers that the old, terrible leadership was the reason that Infinite released in the state that it did. A few years ago...
What did you do? What did you do? It wasn't that hard. Even her clothes look worse. She looks like she's made out of Play-Doh.
Terrible leadership was the reason that Infinite released in the state that it did. A few years ago, post-Infinite, Jez Corden said that apparently Chris Lee, who was the studio head for most of Infinite's development up until like mid-2020 when Joe took over, wasn't exactly forthcoming to various members of leadership about both the state of Halo Infinite and also what was actually possible with the game. And the example that Jez gives is the whole split screen fiasco where Bonnie literally said on stage that every Halo moving forward would launch with it, and then literally the next Halo game rolls around and split screen isn't there for the campaign, and eventually it gets canned entirely. Moving on, Microsoft were apparently overly focused on the Xbox Series X launch and tunnel visioned on it so hard that they insisted that Halo needed to be ready to launch with it, even though it was very clearly not ready to launch.
Yeah, and then they were hold on.
though it was very clearly not ready to
I want this on the background. They took a year. Okay, it wasn't ready to launch. They wanted to launch it with the new Xbox. And they were like, shit, it sucks. We can't do that. We can't launch this Halo with the Xbox, or we won't sell Xboxes. So they pushed it back a year. They still rushed it. They still rushed it. How do you rush the pushback? It needed 2, 3, 4 years. Just, they shouldn't have made this. They shouldn't have made this game. It's almost like they made it just because they have to make it, and they made it bad on purpose because they don't want to make Halo anymore. Might as well kill it.
However, when Joe Staten joined, he apparently went to Microsoft with a list of features that Infinite needed to have on launch to be a success, and said that those features, and by extension that success, could only be achieved with more development time, which eventually caused them to grant them the extra year of development. Yet another reason to love Joe Staten, ladies and gentlemen. And finally, I mean, this is stuff that we've known for a long time now, but several ex-developers have publicly stated their disdain for Microsoft's 18-month contractor policy and have said that it was severely damaging to the game's development. And so, that's everything that we know, at least so far.
I think Microsoft in general was just damaging to the entire game's development. 343 was damaging. Everybody was damaging. And the whole Xbox brand was damaging to Halo Infinite.
About the rocky development that caused Infinite's campaign to launch the way that it did, alongside a ton of other cut content, cut plans, and cut ideas for the campaign. Leave your favorite bit of cut content that you wished made it into Halo Infinite down below in the comments. I gotta say, for me, it's either the island or I don't know, I can't pick one. I want it all, to be honest with you.
You know what my favorite cut content was from Halo Infinite? The entire rest of the game